Welcome to Wizards of the Tower
Roleplay.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about some of the reading influences that influenced Gygax in creating the game of Dungeons and Dragons when it came to fantasy realms. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower
Roleplay.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about some of the reading influences that Gygax listed in the Player's Handbook for creating Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Fantasy books, especially in fantasy authors.
Right. Now, not all of the books that he listed, though, were actually all fantasy.
Well, true. There's some horror, there's some sci-fi.
Right.
Delaney has a list of them, and it's rather extensive, to say the least. And some of it is really kind of obscure and archaic.
Yeah, very archaic and obscure.
Yeah. Keep in mind, when we talk about the kind of stuff that influenced Gary Gygax, or some of the earlier writers of Dungeons and Dragons, like First Edition, that stuff was written in the mid-'70s, folks, okay? Mid-'70s.
Some of it even older than that.
Some even older than that. Okay, that's over 50 years ago, all right? So keep in mind that what they were looking back at as children or young adults reading is something that is probably 3 generations previous to us. Right. Okay, so go ahead and pop off some stuff.
Yeah, we're going to start off with Poul Anderson, who is in the top of the list. Anderson being A, it's a start. And I've actually read one of the first books that he recommended was 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. And this is the second time I'm reading this. I had the smaller regular book many years ago and got rid of it and lost it. But this book is actually where your idea of a paladin comes into mind.
Okay.
And it really brings about what trolls are like too, because the trolls in this regenerate. He has giants in here, he's got fae. But along the same lines, it's got a historical bit because he's talking about Charlemagne and Roland.
Okay.
And he's also talking about Avalon and Morgana Le Fay and the Fae and that world. And so the main character in this is a little bit of a spoiler, but not too much, is Holgar Karlsson. And Holgar is a Norwegian guy who's lived in the United States, and World War II comes along, and he goes back to help fight, and he wakes up one day, and he's in this fantastical world of dwarves and dragons and giants and trolls and fairy. And the fairy in this, the interesting thing is, as I pointed out to Tom, is in most worlds of fairies are good, and in this one he takes the Norwegian or Nordic approach where the fairy are tricksters and bad.
You mean fairy or elves?
Fairies and elves.
Fairies and elves.
Right.
Okay.
And I would recommend this book. It's fairly simple to read. Like I said, it's the second time that I've read this. The first time I read it, I was probably 18 or 19, and I'm coming back almost 50 years later to read it again.
Apparently that happened a lot to people back around World War II, as they would fall asleep and then wake up in a magical realm. Kind of like, John Carter of Mars, stuff like that. They guys get in fights, fall asleep, wake up, magical realm, that kind of stuff.
Another one by Poul Anderson, which I just got, I've never read this book, is The Broken Sword. And this one also takes into the Nordic account of fairies being tricksters and bad, and swapping out a human-born child with a fairy, changeling, which is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And this is, I haven't read this. This is a very Viking-esque series, but it's one of the ones in Gygax's list. And then there was another one, The Last Crusade, which actually also has Holgar Karlsson from 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, the Paladin.
So it says, one of the most influential fantasy novels I've ever read, by Michael Moorcock.
Yeah, The Broken Sword actually was released at the same time as the Lord of the Rings book series.
I know Paul Anderson mainly as a sci-fi writer. He wrote Orion Shall Rise and Boat of a Million Years. 1954 by Paul Anderson. Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some pretty amazing fantasy when you think about it.
Yep.
A lot of Paul Anderson, of course, if you look at the storylines and stuff, a lot of it is based on myth and legend.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about Arthurian stuff or Nordic myth and legend, which is, where an author can get a lot of influences from.
And then the next, we've never read any of these books from John Bellairs.
No.
The Face and the Frost. So I'm not really familiar with that one. I'd never heard of that one before until I read this list. Lee Brackett, just pretty much anything from Lee Brackett. Another one that I'd never heard of as a writer.
I know the name, but I haven't picked up anything.
Frederick Brown was another one. Now Edgar Rice Burroughs, he has the Pull Your Sidearm and the Mars series and the Venus series. Now I read every one of the John Carter of Mars series twice, and I find them to be really good books. They're more science fantasy because they take place in Mars, the world of swords, not magic, but there is some technology.
Okay.
But they're a very good series. They're fun, and it's mainly John Carter, who's an Earthling who has ended up on Mars after falling asleep, and becoming this hero of Mars. And then there's the Princess Deja Thoris that he falls in love with and marries, and then they start their whole...
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people are probably kind of familiar with the basic outline of that.
Yep.
Total classic sci-fi, fantasy, adventure. Been around for years. They made a movie about it, which I thought was pretty good. A lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
Delaney thought it was good, too.
I liked it. It was one of those movies that...
I just wish that they would have kept going with it or done more with it.
Yeah, it was a fun movie.
But classic. Classic fantasy, science fantasy.
Now, one thing you got to remember is Edgar Rice Burroughs is from the 1930s and 40s.
Yes.
Same time as Howard, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, Howard, Lovecraft, quite a few people, Fritz Lieber, a lot of people like that.
Yep, absolutely. Then there was Lynn Carter, it's hard for me to read these, the World's End series.
Now, Lynn Carter, I know that name, but I don't really...
Well, Lynn Carter did some of the Conan books.
Okay, yeah, picked it up. Picked it up. Yeah, because there's Robert Howard, L. Sprague de Camp, and Lynn Carter.
Those are the three big ones.
Working within Conan, yeah.
Right. We have L. Sprague de Camp, which we just mentioned, who also did those.
Yep.
He also had the Least Darkness Fall and the Fallible Friend, which were... ones, like I said, I've never heard of these books. I'm familiar with L. Sprague de Camp because of Conan.
The thing is a lot of these books might be out of print, and it might be really hard to get nowadays. I mean, it might have been even hard to get back then. I don't know.
Yep. Then there was also Pratt and de Camp, which wrote Harold Shea series or the Carnelian Cube. It's really interesting looking through this list, the influences that Gygax had for Dungeons and Dragons, because a lot of this stuff, like I said, I've never heard of. It's very obscure. Again,
if anybody on our channel recognizes some of this or has some of these books, we'd love to hear about it. Yeah. I mean, we just don't run across stuff like this unless they're in some dusty old library somewhere in the Midwest that no one's ever checked out in 50 years.
In fact, I've looked, and some of the stuff you can't even find on Amazon.
Yeah.
You can get it, but it's used or it's very expensive to get.
Probably pretty rare.
Yeah. There was August Darlith.
August Derleth.
Derleth.
Yeah, I know that name, but I don't know anything specifically about the writer.
And then there's Lord Dunsany, which actually, I guess, Tolkien has a little bit of influence from.
Yeah.
Because it's even from the 30s and 40s.
It's even before then. It's Victorian era like fairy fantasy in Victorian era England. The only reason I know that name is because sometimes people bring it up in association with Tolkien when it comes to imaginary worlds. Mm-hmm. Other than that, not sure.
P.J. Farmer, The World of the Tears. Never heard of that one either.
Sorry, I mean, yeah.
Gardner Fox, the Carther series. and the Kyrick series. Another one I'd never heard of. R.E. Howard, Conan. Now, of course, we've got the first 2 Conan books here, and we've got.
Well, we can talk a lot about Conan if you want. I remember reading
2 and 3.
I remember reading that Gary Gygax talked more about the Conan series. He wanted the game to flow and be more fighting oriented, like the Conan books, rather than quest oriented like Tolkien. But it ended up kind of morphing back over to being more like Tolkien than the Howard stuff, because the unwieldiness and the fightingness of D&D, how it is.
Yeah, and the magic and the creatures. And
so, do you want to take a break and talk about Howard for a little bit? Because we can.
Yeah, we can take a quick spin on the Howard, because we love Howard.
We do. So here's an anecdote. Now, this poster here, Conan of Cimmeria, you can see the red-haired Vikings and stuff on the front.
The Frost Giants.
Yeah, this cover. I had a poster of this on my wall in high school. I found it at a used bookstore, and the corner was torn, but I didn't care. I was just happy that this was on there, and I had this on my wall. I don't know where it went. I have never seen that thing since, but man, did I love it. And the thing is I love this because, the artwork always looped me in.
Yeah, Frazetta.
Frazetta. Come on. We talked about Frazetta before and the influence of fantasy art. But Conan, how fast these stories flowed. How interesting they were, how imaginative they were.
They're short stories, because there's multiple stories in them.
Yeah, they're short stories.
And there's even, some drawings in some of these. But, there's the map and everything else. But, you've got Queen of the Black Coast, Bullet, pirate. And then there's, of course, Valeria, who is one of his other companions.
Yep.
And so, I love Conan. I remember, too, we had this poster not long ago. You came home with them framed, and another one, that you'd gotten on a job site. Somebody was throwing them out, so you brought them home.
They're here somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where they're at, but they're here somewhere. Yep, I've got them. I kept them because I love Frazetta stuff so much.
Yeah.
Conan, to me, I discovered Conan in high school, in my first few years, and it was because mainly of a friend of mine who was really into fantasy reading and writing. I didn't really know what to make of it, because I was really more of a sci-fi person. I really dug sci-fi. And I was not so much fantasy, but then the Conan movie came out with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I was really fascinated, by the imagery in there and the music and everything. To me, I really, really, really liked it. And my friend said, hey, I've tried reading some of the books, they go really fast and they're easy. So right now, finding these editions of these books are kind of hard to find so far. These, I think they're Ace, okay? Now, I had them all at one time. I don't know what I did with them. I've recycled my books so many times, but I had them all. And just about everybody who's a big Conan fan is going to say, yeah, I got this edition too somewhere. I got all these books. I got the whole series.
The only book we don't have, I think, was the last one in the series.
Yeah.
And I could never get it.
Well, it's hard to get. I mean, some of the ones are kind of held back. What is it about Conan that has such an appeal?
Yep.
Well, okay. Cimmeria, the world he lives in, he's from Cimmeria, he's from Hyperborea, I think is what it's called, the world he's from. Sort of parallels Europe in a way. Cimmerians in the north, you have the people from the south who are like darker skinned people. Stygians, and in the middle, Stygian was like Egypt, and they had like the Stygian tombs and stuff. All written by Robert Howard, some kid living in Texas, with a mommy complex. Almost impossible to believe that he came up with this stuff, but it's true. Absolutely true.
Started off writing in Weird Tales.
Yeah, he wrote about pirates, wrote about cowboys, outlaws. Don't forget, he also wrote about Solomon Kane.
And there was actually the original Red Sonja.
Yeah.
Red Sonja of Ragatine, which is more of a Renaissance era. Instead of this bikini-clad woman, she's actually more of the swashbuckler type in the, I think it's 15 or 1600s. Yeah,
if I remember right, when you look at the original illustrations, she's sort of more like a musketeer type, a swashbuckler with the kind of, I don't know how to describe.
Yeah, pistol and the rapier.
Yeah, the rapier. So it's a whole lot different than the barbarian girl in the chainmail bikini, which is this trope that
which is the whole Marvel creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Conan. In my consideration, I believe Conan to be the anchor that holds fantasy in place, along with Tolkien. But we're going to talk about Tolkien a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do believe that Conan, because of the imagination of the worlds, because of the magic in the worlds, because of the beings and the monsters, the beasts, going out on a quest, grave robbing, treasure hunting, fighting for the city guard, corrupt officials, wenches, drinking, fighting, all that plays into D&D and fantasy games so heavily. You've got to look at it as, that Conan and Robert Howard is almost like the anchor that holds fantasy in place.
And there's one other writer that's the same way, but we'll talk about that person here in just a moment.
We'll keep going.
Okay, then you have Sterling Lanier, Hero's Journey, Hiero's Journey. I'd never heard of that one either.
I don't know.
Okay, so the one that I was just hitting upon, Fritz Leiber.
Oh, here we go. Yeah,
Fritz Leiber. Fritz Leiber is actually considered the father of sword and sorcery.
Fafhrd and Grey Mouser.
Yeah, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's 8 in these, and I originally had the old covers that were like these, and got rid of them because I never read them, and I decided here just in last year, 2023, to start picking the Fritz Leiber, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser books up and start reading them. And these are fun. These are really fun. And the first book starts off about Fafhrd, and then the next one's about Grey Mouser, and then the third story is how the two met and how they started their career together. And it's very similar to Conan. So if you like Conan and you've never read Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, read Fafhrd and Grey Mouser.
Well, I mean, just the name, Swords and Deviltry.
Right.
Lankmar, Book 1. Now, they talk about Lankmar as being sort of an inspiration for some of the fantasy realms in D&D.
Yep.
Yeah, they don't have the original.
Now, Fritz Leiber had a degree in Shakespearean writing, and the words that he uses are very eloquent. Yeah. I've read some of the things to Tom, and his wordsmithing is beyond.
It's almost like poetry when you read it.
It is.
It really is.
It's words that you've never even heard or read of today, but exist.
The thing is about Fritz Leiber is you can tell that he took great care for writing a sentence to make it as mushy,
and as eloquent,
as deep
and descriptive. It's almost like using the word epiphany.
Yeah,
that's a word that nobody uses today.
Yeah. But well, there's so much in it, that it isn't so much just a simple sentence that we're so used to in writing, because people rarely write with that kind of depth and quality anymore. Yeah. But the thing is what people don't realize is that used to be considered good writing, and it just doesn't come about anymore.
Yeah. But I would highly recommend the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser books if you've never read them. They are the epitome of thievery and adventure and a barbarian and magic and wizardry and everything else. It's just a ton of fun. Tom's glancing through.
Man, this is really cool.
Read off just a little bit.
Okay.
He just randomly opened this book.
Yeah. Hearkening in obedience, he said, giving away. Only be swift. We must be well away from Cold Corner before kidnap time, she said. Today I must gather my things together and provide us with sleigh, swift horses, and a store of food. Leave all that to me. You behave today exactly as you're wont, keeping well away from me, in case our enemies set spies upon you, as both Seti and Hingol are most likely to do. Very well, Fafhrd agreed. And now, my sweetest, hush, hush, have patience. To cap your deception, climb into the roof of the God's Hell well before the show, just as you did last night. There just might be an attempt to kidnap me during the show. I mean, there's so much there just in that little paragraph. It's like you're reading a mini movie right there.
Yeah.
And that's
why they've never made movies about Fafhrd and Grey Mouser is beyond me.
I'll never understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a wealth of source material way beyond anything else.
Yeah. Let's see. H.P. Lovecraft. So here's the horror aspect that we were talking about.
Well, I've got some Lovecraft books. Here's the basic Call of Cthulhu right here. I've got a few others. I mean, the imaginations in Lovecraft are great, okay? They're not for everybody, mainly because they have an archaic sense the way they're written. And people tend to misjudge Lovecraft today. You know, keep in mind Lovecraft was kind of mentally ill and lived in a time period that most of us can't even imagine. So take his work with a grain of salt, but enjoy it if you want to, because it is very imaginative.
Yeah. A. Merritt. Books like Creep, Shadow, Creep, Moon, Pool, Dwellers in the Mirage. See, I'd never heard of A. Merritt before.
It's probably some pretty stout fantasy, sounds like.
Michael Moorcock, Stormbringer, Slayers of the Souls, Hawk Moon series. Yeah, we all know Elric of Melnibone and Melbonia, or however you want to pronounce it, and Stormbringer, you know, the sword, the sentient sword that would steal the lives and kept him alive and kind of helped him out. I never liked Moorcock. I always thought Moorcock was a little bit weird. I had a lot of friends that just were just all gaga over Michael Moorcock and the Elric books.
In the end, doesn't Stormbringer kill Elric?
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
I think so, because and then they find another. That's the whole thing about a sentient sword.
Yeah.
Is I think the idea of a sentient sword
transforms into whatever and goes off into.
Yeah, it's a demon inside a sword that makes people do things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a trope that comes up again and again, and there's even Book of Nine Swords for D&D. I have never read Michael Moorcock. I know that he's considered to be really big, you know, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. When it comes to fantasy, almost like psychedelia, you know, stuff like that. But to me, I don't know, I just never approached it.
Yeah.
Did you read it a lot?
I tried to read it, and I just could not get into it. And I might appreciate it a lot more now, because originally I couldn't read the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser books. I just couldn't get into it. And recently, like I said, I started reading them, and I'm like, wow, I'm enjoying these, and I've been picking them up slowly from Amazon and reading them.
Well, a person's tastes in reading change over time. I mean, you really do. I could never have read Tolkien when I was in high school. I just couldn't. I just could not sit still long enough.
We have friends that just hate Tolkien.
Yeah.
Can't read it, can't get through the first book. But yet Wheel of Time books that can...
We're not going to go there.
No.
But right now, I mean, I can appreciate Tolkien's story, and I can appreciate his writing style a lot more, and I can sit down for a couple hours and really just inject myself into that world.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting, they're actually heavy metal bands that either use the artwork from Moorcock, Sarathungal.
Yeah.
Or there's the band Tigers of Pantang.
Oh, yeah, but Sarathungal is a Tolkien reference.
It's a Tolkien reference, but they use the artwork from the Elric books.
Okay.
The original Elric books that came out.
So I remember that. Elric was very pale.
Yep.
That specific artist, I cannot think who it is, but I remember those very intriguing book covers. Very intriguing. Yeah. Almost like the
We'll find it,
stuff.
we'll post it down below.
Yeah, we'll find that, because, you know, that is intriguing, fantasy stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about it when we did our fantasy art.
Fantasy art?
Yeah, we might have talked about that a little bit. Andrea Norton. Andrea, yeah. Now, I believe she also had a book that was heavily D&D based that was called Quag Keep, which I actually had and started reading, and I just thought it was just some of the worst fantasy I ever read at the time.
I know Andre Norton from sci-fi. I read a ton of Andre Norton when I was in junior high and high school. Andre Norton was my go-to when it came to sci-fi. Classic sci-fi, rockets and planets, and things like that. I was always amazed to realize that Andre Norton is a lady. A lot of writers, you know, because they couldn't get their stuff published, would kind of use a male pen name, so they could actually get their stuff published. It wasn't until much later that I realized that, you know, a lot of writers do that, which to me, you know, I'm so sorry you couldn't get published with your actual name, but I'm so glad you did write your stuff.
Yep. So, yeah, Quag Keep. And I think you can get Quag Keep, which is about a bunch of adventures in a fantasy world, and it's heavily based. She worked with Gygax writing that book.
I seem to remember that from reading about that. Andre Norton was still alive at that time.
Yep. Andrew Offutt, Swords Against Darkness 3.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Let's see. There is Fletcher Pratt,
I know that name, but
Blue
I
Star.
don't know. I don't know.
Fred Superhagen.
Fred Saberhagen.
Saberhagen. Yeah. Changelings Earth.
I'm more of a sci-fi maybe than I know. I think it's mainly sci-fi, but I'm not sure. I've seen the Fred Saberhagen books. I don't know. I just never picked them up.
Margaret St. Clair. The Shadows of the People and Signs of the Abbeys. I'd never heard of these either.
You got me.
And then, of course, you got Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, which we've got an old series sitting here.
We've got a lot of Tolkien books.
Yeah,
and I picked up some ones I picked them up at my local used bookstore.
We last year walked into our local bookstore and found this version in
hardcover. Yeah.
With the maps and
everything.
The covers were missing on one of them.
Just one of them. The other books have covers. Essentially printed in the early 60s in very good condition.
I've had these since the 70s when I first read them. These were the books that I read, and it shows they're kind of ragged and starting to fall apart. And
so here's an interesting anecdote. Here, when I first started dating Delaney, when we were living together, she bought me my set of Tolkien. Right here, the hardcover.
Which actually is the art versions.
Yep. And they're super, super, super cool because they have the great art all over them, as you can see. And
in fact, we've got other older versions.
Yeah, they're really amazing. And then she wrote something in here that is just absolutely fantastic. To my love and soulmate on Yule 2010, Thomas, I hope beyond hope that you treasure this gift as much as I treasure you. The Lord of the Rings is my favorite books, and to date only this trilogy, The Hobbit and the Sword of Shannara, I have read more than once. The Lord of the Rings are a classic and watched in fantasy writing, and in my view, fiction as well. To you, I give this to you on Yule 2010. Love always. What does it say?
Until we seek out Grey Havens.
See? That's pretty good. Still brings a tear to my eye.
Brings a tear to my eye, too.
Yeah, I like Tolkien. I think I'll always like Tolkien.
Yeah, and like we've said, we know friends who say they can't read hardly a chapter of it, but yet they can read other books, which, that we find rather not so great.
It's an acquired taste.
Yeah,
I will say.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but if you don't read it, you'll probably be missing out on some of the greatest literature that's ever been created in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it's influential not only in fantasy, sci-fi, literature, you name it, culture, everything.
Movies. Look at the movies now. It created technology that has now set the precedent. We used to base everything upon Industrial Light and Magic, and now we base it upon Weta.
Yeah,
which is from Peter Jackson.
The movie creation.
Yeah. For those films.
And we could do an entire episode on Tolkien. But suffice to say that is another huge anchor in the fantasy realm that holds it all together, in my opinion.
Yeah. Jack Vance, The Eyes of the Overworld and the Dying Earth series.
I know that name, but I haven't really read any.
Stanley Weinbaum. No series named in this one. Manly Wade Willman. No series named. Jack Williamson, and Roger Zelazny.
Zelazny.
Jack of Shadows, Amber series, and so forth.
Yeah, I know that name, Roger Zelazny, and I mainly a sci-fi, but I'm not sure exactly who they are, what they wrote. I just I remember that those books coming out a lot when I started college. At that time, I wasn't really into fantasy that much, so I never really picked up much of that.
Yeah.
But there's definitely more here we can talk about.
Yeah, now there's some that we wanted to throw out that we think are really good influences. In fact, I know Pathfinder listed some of these. And the first was the Greyhawk Adventures by Gary Gygax, Gord the Rogue, Saga of the Old City. I have 4 of these books. I think there were 5.
Okay.
And this is about a thief by the name of Gord. And they're very much like Fafford and Grey Mouser types, except for you don't have Fafford, you've got Gord the Rogue.
Right.
And they're fun books to read. Now, I can't say that he was a great writer, but it definitely took you into the adventure of Greyhawk, and you learned a little bit about Greyhawk, and I would recommend it if you can find any of these Gord the Rogue books.
Well, Greyhawk is still a big thing. I mean, you still hear about the Free City of Greyhawk as being part of modules, part of storylines with characters, settings.
Yep.
It hasn't completely faded away. It's still there after all this time.
Yep.
You know.
I
don't know for sure, but I don't believe that Gygax created Greyhawk.
It was an amalgamation of a bunch of people, I think.
Yeah, I think it might have been somebody else.
Because Arneson had some stuff there. Blackmore, because they threw Blackmore in there.
Yeah.
But Greyhawk definitely was the world that he adventured out of.
Oh, true. I know that. Yeah, I know that.
And a lot of his adventures, you had, who is it? Tinser and Bigby, who were actually, I think, one of his kids was one of those characters.
Okay.
Bigby. Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, the Dragonlance series. Now, I read many of these Dragonlance series. I read all of the first 3 Dragonlance books as soon as they came out. Love these books. They're really good. This is definitely the epitome of a Dungeons and Dragons book.
Yeah.
The adventures, the treasure, the party, dealing with deities, dealing with evil and good.
Yeah. I've got some newer Hickman and Weiss stuff. I don't know where they're at, but we put them back here somewhere. I kind of liked them a little bit. I don't know. I had some problems.
There was a series about the elves that were controlling, enslaving humans.
The evil elves, and I read the first 2. I found that they were edited strangely, so that the writing didn't flow as nice as I wanted.
So anyway.
I read a couple of the Dragonlances.
Did you read them?
Yeah. You let me read a couple, and they were good. They're good. They're good fantasy. I enjoyed them more than I enjoyed the Sword of Shannara stuff.
Yeah.
Dragonlance stuff. I specifically remember this cover. They're pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, I really, I thought they were pretty good when it comes to fantasy.
Yeah. Next is Andrzej Sapkowski.
Sapkowski. Yeah.
Yeah. The Witcher series.
The Witcher series. I didn't know anything about this until people started talking about the video game and the books and stuff like that. And then the books, it's high fantasy.
Yeah.
You know.
They're good. I like the Witcher series. The TV show,
it has its
the first series, but we're not going to get into it.
Yeah, it has its ups and downs. The thing about the books is they're adult.
Yeah.
Okay. They're adult. They don't insult your intelligence, and they don't come across as like juvenile fiction, stuff like that. They're adult. So if you are looking for more meatier, tougher fantasy realms, the different Witcher stuff is it.
Yeah, and we've got every one of the Witcher books. Yeah. And I've read every one of them.
I have not read every one of them. I've read like the first 2 or 3. I don't know. There's almost nothing that can be said about them, really, if you haven't read them. If you haven't read them, you should give yourself a chance to read them and to experience that world. It's interesting. My biggest complaint about a lot of it is I don't have, even now when I think about it, I don't have a clear image in my head about what his world looks like. Map-wise, world-wise, land-wise. It just seems kind of nebulous to me.
Because I don't think there's even a map in here.
Yeah, I've never been able to come across a map of it.
There's maps because it's based upon the video game. There's maps of it because of the video game.
And people make those maps and they show them, but not like Tolkien had his map of Middle-earth, which you can follow and you know where everything is. Sapkowski is a little more vague with that. And so it's a little tougher to kind of get, to get into that world, to imagine where you're at.
Yeah. The last that I will add is the R.A. Salvatore Crystal Shard. Now these aren't the original covers. They're similar to the original covers. I had all the 3 original books, and I gave them to my boys, and they went bye-bye.
Yeah.
So I recently added them back into my collection just because I liked the original R.A. Salvatore. Now, everyone thinks with the R.A. Salvatore books, they think of Dritz Erdon. And they didn't start off being so heavily Dritz. They were Brunor Battleaxe, the dwarf, and there was a halfling, and then there was the barbarian. I don't know why their names are slipping me right now.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I liked these books. I thought they were fun.
Yeah.
They were more geared towards the barbarian youth and the halfling and Brunor and a little bit of Dritz, but the barbarian boy was mainly the main focus.
So I like R.A. Salvatore, of course, is a contemporary of the earlier D&D creations in the fantasy world.
Yeah, the Forgotten Realm.
Yeah, they talk about that in some of the books about earlier, D&D creations. How they hired R.A. Salvatore on to write some of the books and come up with some of the source material.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in there. So there was one other thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if you read anything about this, but I cannot think of the author, but the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant.
Oh, yeah. Stephen R. Donaldson.
Stephen R. Donaldson.
Yes.
So when I was in junior high school and high school, Stephen R. Donaldson was the author.
He was the go-to for it was either Terry Brooks, Shannara, or Donaldson with the Thomas Covenant, Lord Fowl's Bane.
Lord Fowl's Bane. So I saw, everybody at school was walking around with those books on their arms, and
we have those books.
I never read any of them. I didn't know anything about them. People talked about how, they were kind of disturbing in some aspects. I don't know. I don't know anything about him. But
I found that the main character was just deplorable. I couldn't stand him.
Well, he was a leper, right?
He was a leper, but that wasn't why. He
did other stuff that was bad.
Yeah, I just couldn't stand him.
Yeah. That's another fantasy bent that I think that a lot of people probably read when they were in their youth, and then they're like,
Yeah.
Well, I don't read a lot of fantasy. I do read some, and I read, some of my more recent stuff would be like we talked about the Orcs books. I read a little bit of The Witcher.
Yeah.
I read some of these, the Half-Orc books, the Grey Bastards, that kind of stuff. I read a lot about historical fiction, like especially James Nelson's Viking books. I read a lot of that, which kind of fuels my need for swords and fighting. But what kind of got me back into fantasy is this.
Yeah,
right?
Tom was going through our library and found it. And started reading it.
I found it. I'm like, Game of Thrones, what's that? And you said, I don't know.
I had it, and when I worked at a company, there were a lot of the guys I gamed with that were reading it. And that's how I found it in a used bookstore, and I picked it up, but I never read it.
Yeah. It came out in like 96 or whatever. We're not going to talk at all about the show, okay? These are more about the books. Now, the thing about the Game of Thrones stuff is it's very, very, very in-depth, world building, but George R.R. Martin is also a very good writer. And I know it's controversial because of the stuff he puts in there, but I'm talking more about writing style. It's very engaging. It's very interesting, and it keeps it going, keeps the story rolling, keeps it going with all these different characters. It sort of got me hooked back again into reading fantasy.
Well, there was the Abercrombie books that you read too.
Well, that's that's even more recent. I read the Joe Abercrombie books, and those, he's a good writer also. More hard fantasy with a little less sorcery in there. And then a book series that we read together is E.E. Knight, the Dragon books.
Now, after reading these books, I changed the dragons in my world to match more of what E.E. Knight's dragons are.
Yeah.
So in E.E. Knight's world, a dragon, when a female hatches her eggs out, the dragons aren't all of a red or blue or green; they're mixed.
Yeah.
Some are even scaleless.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that happens in the dragon books if you haven't read them. Basically, the dragons are the main characters, okay? And that's kind of how he wrote about them. The dragons are the main characters. And so you get to see the world from their point of view. And that's what's really kind of cool. And the books are well written, easy to read, and I know there's more than 5 of them. We have 5.
There are
or 6.
No, there's 5 that we have. I don't
Yeah.
think we ever picked up the last one.
We never did. I know there's more.
Yeah.
We just kind of moved on to other stuff. I'm not saying that they're not engaging. They are engaging.
Well, the first 3 books were pretty good, and then after that, it starts to become the same old, same old.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem with a lot of series. Is it?
Yeah.
You know, it sorts to get stuck in, you know, the same rut and won't get out. Wheel of Time. I tried to read Wheel of Time. I can understand where people are really influenced by Wheel of Time, and they want stories to be like that. It's best that we don't bring that up more than just to mention it. That, you know, that's there, that kind of thing.
My belief is if you read the first 5 books of Wheel of Time, you pretty much read the whole series. But that's just kind of the view that we have.
I think our reason for making this episode about all our fantasy writing and influences is basically that understanding where the games come from, where imagination starts, and where it moves out from.
Where you yourself can use that for your own world or your own games.
Yeah.
Is by taking snippets of ideas from any of these worlds.
Yeah. It's all based on top of each other, kind of like bricks or stacks in a stone wall. It keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts out at the foundation and works its way up to the modern world now. And we're not going to talk about the modern authors out there because, you know, everybody knows about the Sword of the Blah Blah series and the Crown of the Blee Blah series and the Land of Thorn and Crossbows and blah 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 blah. Whatever. There's hundreds of them.
Yeah, when I go into a bookstore nowadays, I have a harder time picking out fantasy books I want to read because I pick it up and I start reading and I'm like, oh, that's the same as this book. That's the same as this book. And this one's the same as this book.
Yeah.
And it's every book I go through, it's like, this is the same as this. It's like there's no originality to it anymore.
What's happened a lot in fantasy is because people have looked at it as, you know, it's a moneymaker. It really is. You know, it's a way to get people roped into reading. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's a moneymaker. And the quality, in my opinion, has dropped tremendously.
Yeah.
It's the same tropes, the same memes, the same everything just thrown out there. And that's to say, you know, that's my opinion. That doesn't mean that anybody should stop reading fantasy. I approve 100% if you're reading it and enjoying it. Good. Have fun. Enjoy it. Use your imagination. Enjoy your reading. At least you're reading something.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and if you have a series that you like, that you find interesting or influenced your campaign, let us know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you guys know, but we do have a Discord channel, and we will post it here, over there, somewhere on this screen, probably up above and down below. And it'll always be in the links down below too. So come join our Discord channel. We don't charge anything like some people do to join.
Yeah.
Use it to have for discussion, for throwing us ideas for future episodes that maybe you would like to see us cover or do. No promises, but we'll do our best.
Sure.
Role play, just keep it cordial and keep the server cordial because I don't want to have to ban anybody, but you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to end this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Role play.
And we hope that you like, share, subscribe, spread the word, and ring the bell, make a comment, because we will always reply back to your comment, no matter what. Anyway, thanks, folks.
Thanks, folks.